Chapter 1. The Ring. On my finger, there is a specific kind of panic that only happens in Las Vegas hotel rooms at 7 in the morning when you wake up to sunlight slicing through blackout curtains you forgot to close. A head that feels like it is full of wet concrete, and a weight on your left hand that absolutely, positively was not there the night before. I stared at the ceiling for 4 full seconds before I looked down. The ring was thin and gold and elegant in a way that nothing from a Vegas gift shop ever is. It sat on my ring finger like it belonged there, like it had always been there. Like my body had simply accepted it in the night while my brain was too soaked in champagne and terrible decisions to argue. I sat up so fast the room tilted. My name is Wren Calloway. I am 28 years old. I teach third grade. I have never been married, never been engaged, never even come close. I am, by every reasonable measure, the most deliberately unbothered person in my entire family when it comes to love. My younger sister Della is the romantic. Della is the one with the grand love story, the beautiful fiancé, the Pinterest wedding board she has been curating since she was 16. Della is the reason I flew to Las Vegas in the first place. And yet, there I was, ring on my finger, champagne headache, zero memory of the last 4 hours of the previous night. I turned my head very slowly. The other side of the bed was empty. The pillow had a dent in it. There was a glass of water on the nightstand beside it, and next to the glass was a folded piece of hotel stationery with handwriting I did not recognize. The letters were precise, almost architectural, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was taught penmanship as a serious subject. I picked up the note. It read, "Annulment paperwork is already being processed. Lawyer contact is on your phone. Do not panic. Nothing happened. I have spoken to the chapel. Drink the water, Cassian." I read it 3 times. Cassian Voss, my sister's maid of honor. The woman who had looked at me across the rehearsal dinner table 2 nights ago, like I was a mildly inconvenient piece of furniture someone had moved without asking. The woman who wore a blazer to a bachelorette pool party and somehow made it look like the right choice. The woman who had said exactly 11 words to me in the 48 hours since I had arrived in Las Vegas, and 7 of those words were a polite request for me to pass the breadbasket. I drank the water. I picked up my phone. There were 17 texts from Della. There was a contact saved under the name Reeves Family Law, with a note that said already briefed, call after 10. And there was a photo in my camera roll that I absolutely did not take, of me and Cassian Voss standing in front of a man in an Elvis jumpsuit, both of us holding tiny bouquets of fake white roses, both of us grinning like we had just discovered something wonderful. My smile in that photo was the biggest smile I had seen on my own face in 2 years. I put the phone face down on the blanket and breathed. Okay, I told myself. Okay. People make mistakes in Las Vegas. That is practically the city's founding principle. This was fixable. The note said it was fixable. The lawyer said it was fixable. By the time Della's wedding happened in 4 days, this would be a sealed legal document and a story I would tell at no one's bachelorette party ever again. I just had to get through 4 more days. I had to get through 4 more days while being in the same hotel, attending the same pre-wedding events, sitting at the same dinner tables, and not making eye contact with the woman whose last name was apparently now also Calloway, at least temporarily, at least on one very embarrassing piece of government paperwork. I pulled myself out of bed and walked to the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked, if anything, happier than I had in months. I hated that. I tucked it away. I turned on the shower and stood under cold water until the feeling went away. When I finally emerged from my room, dressed and sunglassed, and carrying the largest coffee the hotel lobby could produce, Cassian was already sitting at a table near the window of the breakfast area. She had a laptop open. She was reading something on her screen with the focused expression of a woman who found spreadsheets genuinely interesting. She was wearing a pale gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, and her dark hair was pulled back, and she looked, in the sharp morning light, exactly like someone who had not made any mistakes the previous evening. She looked like someone who had audited the previous evening and found it satisfactory. She looked up when I approached. Her expression did not change. "You got my note," she said. "I got your note," I said. "Good. The lawyer will have the paperwork filed by end of week. You won't need to do anything except sign where indicated." "I've already signed my portion." "You signed it this morning?" At 6:15. She turned back to her laptop. The water helped. I sat down across from her without being invited. "What exactly happened last night?" She closed the laptop. She looked at me with eyes that were a very unusual shade of gray-green, the kind of color that belongs in a painting of a coastline, and she said, "You and I went to get the girls water from the casino bar. The girls went to play slots. We ended up at a karaoke bar 2 blocks east. You sang an extremely committed rendition of a song I will not name. We had 4 more drinks. You said, and I am quoting you directly, that you believed in love as a concept, but that you personally had given up on it ever arriving for you specifically. And then you looked at the wedding chapel across the street and said, 'Wouldn't it be funny?' And I said, 'Yes, it would be very funny,' and then we went and made it extremely unfunny." I stared at her. "That is the most we have ever spoken," I said. Something crossed her face. It was very fast and very small. "Yes," she said, "I suppose it is." She opened her laptop again. I sat there with my coffee going cold between my hands, thinking that the morning after accidentally marrying a near stranger was somehow not the strangest part of this. The strangest part was the warmth sitting quiet and unwanted in my chest, which had no business being there, which I fully intended to remove before it became a problem. But I had no idea, not then, not sitting in that hotel breakfast room in the Vegas morning light, how far from a problem and how close to the center of everything Cassian Voss was about to become. Chapter 2, The Maid of Honor, and the Mess I Have Always Been, the Calm Sister. That is my assigned role in the Calloway family. The way some children are the funny one, or the responsible one, or the one who can parallel park. I am the calm one. Della panics. I smooth. Della cries at commercials. I hand her tissues and say measured, sensible things. Our mother, who is warm and slightly chaotic in a way that has always made me feel protective of her, once told me that I was born already knowing how to exhale. She said it admiringly. I have always been slightly unsure whether it was a compliment. There is a version of calm that is genuine peace. And then there is the other kind, the kind that is really just a very organized form of self-protection. You train yourself to need less. You get very good at managing your own weather. You convince yourself over time that this is maturity rather than armor, and eventually you believe it enough that you stop checking. I had been the calm sister for 28 years. I had been so good at it that no one, including me, had noticed that I was also the lonely one. None of this prepared me for the next 72 hours. Della called at 9:30, 20 minutes after I returned to my room from breakfast, while I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, trying to decide if the paperwork situation required telling her, or if it was so swiftly handled that it could be quietly filed under things that did not truly happen. "I have 17 texts from you," I told her when I picked up. "I know. Don't read the last 4. I was panicking." Her voice was thick. "Ren, are you okay? Marcus said he saw you leave the bar with Cassian, and then neither of you came back, and I thought something happened." "Nothing happened," I said, which was technically true in the specific way Cassian had meant it in her note. "We got turned around. Vegas is very confusing. You were gone for 3 hours. We got very turned around." There was a pause on the line. Della has known me for 25 of my 28 years. She has a very accurate internal sensor for when I am omitting something. "Ren, I'm fine," I said. "I promise. How are you?" "You have a final dress fitting in 2 hours." The subject change worked because Della's is, above all things, a woman who loves a schedule. She moved on. She told me about the fitting, about the florist issue that had apparently arisen at midnight, about how Marcus's mother had texted her a suggestion about the centerpieces that she was choosing to interpret as well-meaning. I listened and made the right sounds, and by the time I hung up, I had successfully not told her anything. I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and texted Cassian. I should say something about what it means to text someone you accidentally married. There is no established protocol. There is no section of any etiquette guide that covers the specific social dynamics of waking up, legally bound to your sister's maid of honor, and trying to determine, over a cellular network, what the appropriate tone is for subsequent communication. I wrote and deleted 3 different versions of my message before landing on something that felt clean and functional, which is exactly the kind of word I was reaching toward without knowing it yet. I wrote, Della doesn't know. Are we keeping it that way until after the wedding? The reply came 40 seconds later. It read, that was my recommendation, yes. No reason to add stress to her week. The paperwork will be resolved by Saturday, I wrote back. Agreed. Are we going to be weird about this? There was a longer pause, then, define weird, I wrote, avoiding each other, acting strange, making it obvious something happened. Another pause, then, I don't do weird, I do functional. We can be functional. I looked at that word for a long time. Functional. It was such a precise, contained word. It said exactly what it meant, and nothing more. It left no room for anything soft. I decided I liked it very much, and that it was exactly the right approach, and I put my phone away. The dress fitting was held at a bridal suite on the 4th floor, and 6 of us crowded into the bright little room while Della stood on a low platform in her gown and cried in the good way, the way that meant she was happy, not frightened. Her best friend from college, Priya, stood next to me and handed out tissues. Marcus's sister, who was a bridesmaid, took 17 photos. And Cassian stood at the edge of the room with a tablet and a checklist, coordinating something through a quiet phone call, and every few minutes she would look up and catch me looking at her, and then look away again. We were very functional. After the fitting, there was lunch. After lunch, there was a spa appointment that I had forgotten was scheduled. I spent 45 minutes in a chair next to Cassian while we both had our start nails done, and we talked about the wedding timeline, and about Della's preference for the ceremony music, and about how the florist issue had been resolved. We talked the way colleagues talk when they are working on a shared project. It was perfectly pleasant. It was aggressively normal. I had chosen a pale rose color for my nails, which the technician approved of. Cassian chose a deep burgundy, which she selected without deliberation, picking it up from the display and handing it over in a single motion like someone who does not waste time on decisions that are already made. I watched her from the corner of my eye and thought about what it would be like to be a person who decides things that quickly. I decide things slowly and thoroughly, and sometimes I circle back 3 times before I commit, which is probably why the 2 decisions I had made fast in my adult life, the woman I mentioned to a stranger in a karaoke bar and one accidental chapel, were the most significant things that had happened to me in years. On the walk back to the hotel, she said, without preamble, "You don't remember any of it." I looked at her. "Do you? Some of it." She was looking straight ahead. The Vegas Strip was loud around us. Everything glitter and noise, and the particular desperation of a city that never sleeps. You told me about why you stopped believing in love. It was during the second drink. What did I say? She was quiet for a moment. Then, that you had loved someone for 2 years, and then discovered that she had been very carefully keeping you in a box, not hiding you, just keeping you contained, not letting you take up space outside the relationship, and that when it ended, you decided it was safer to be the one who didn't want things. I stopped walking. She stopped 2 steps ahead and turned back. You were very honest, she said. It seemed important to you to be honest. I was drunk. People are often honest when they're drunk. I started walking again. She fell into step beside me. We didn't say anything else for the rest of the block. But when we reached the hotel entrance, she held the door, and I walked through it, and our arms brushed, and neither of us moved away. I told myself it meant nothing. I was very convincing. I had a lot of practice at that particular form of self-deception. I had been telling myself that things meant nothing 2 years, and I had gotten very efficient at it, the way you get efficient at anything you do regularly. You develop a process. You notice the feeling, you label it inconvenient. You find an explanation that doesn't require you to do anything uncomfortable, and you move on. I was an expert. I had workshopped this skill on a previous relationship, 2 years of careful nothing that was actually everything. And I had emerged from it with the conviction that the safest heart is a well managed one. What I had not accounted for was someone whose arm brushes yours in a hotel doorway and who doesn't move away. Chapter 3. The Florist and the Feeling. The Florist was a small shop 3 blocks from the chapel where Della and Marcus were to be married. And someone had accidentally ordered the wrong shade of cream for the table arrangements, and Cassian needed to go speak with the florist in person. And I offered to come because I had nothing else to do, and the alternative was sitting in my hotel room thinking about what she had told me I'd said, about keeping myself in a box. I was not going to think about that, but I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it the entire cab ride, which I spent looking out the window at the Vegas Strip, giving way to side streets, at the way the city changed character as you moved away from its center, becoming almost quiet in places, almost ordinary, gas stations and dry cleaners, and the kind of small restaurants that the tourists never find. I had spent 2 years convincing myself that the box was comfortable, that a person who did not expect much from love could not be surprised by its absence. That self-sufficiency was a form of freedom rather than a wall I had built, so gradually I forgot it was a wall. 2 drinks with a stranger in a karaoke bar had apparently dismantled the entire architecture. I looked at Cassian in the cab and wondered if she had noticed. Of course she had noticed. She noticed everything. The florist's name was Eduardo, and he was a small, energetic man who smelled like roses and spoke with his hands and was deeply apologetic about the cream situation. Cassian handled him with a patience I had not expected from her. She was not cold in the way she sometimes seemed from a distance. She was precise and direct, but she listened, really listened, when Eduardo explained the mix-up, and she asked questions that showed she had been paying attention. And in the end, she found a solution that Eduardo seemed genuinely pleased with. I stood to the side and watched her work. She caught me watching. "You're not going to weigh in?" she asked. "You've got it," I said. "You didn't need me here." "No," she agreed. "But you came anyway." Something in that landed differently than she probably meant it. I looked away at a display of sunflowers and said, "The yellow ones are nice." "Della hates yellow, I know." I said they're nice, not that we should use them. And then, unexpectedly, Cassian smiled. It was a small smile, and it happened quickly, and then it was gone, but it changed her face in the way a window opening changes a room, everything slightly brighter and more full of air. I felt it in my chest in a way I had no business feeling anything. We walked back to the hotel because the day was actually pleasant once you got off the strip, and on the walk, she asked about my students, which surprised me because I did not remember mentioning them. I told her about my class, about the kid who had decided that every writing assignment should feature dinosaurs regardless of the prompt, about the girl who had cried for 40 minutes because a classroom goldfish had died, and then the next day brought in a drawing of the goldfish ascending to heaven with tiny wings. Cassian listened with her hands in her pockets and her eyes on the sidewalk, and twice she laughed, the real kind, the kind that escapes before you can reconsider it. "You love it," she said. "I do," I said. "Teaching is the one thing I've never doubted." She glanced at me sideways. "Just the one thing?" "Just the one thing." We reached a taco truck that was parked near a parking lot, and without discussion, we both stopped and bought tacos, and sat on a low concrete wall to eat them, and it was the least sophisticated meal I could imagine. Paper plates and plastic forks and salsa packets, and it was the most comfortable I had felt in a days. In weeks, maybe. There was something about Cassian when the professional armor was slightly lowered, something that was warm and quiet and present in a way that made the air feel more substantial. Can I ask you something? I said. She was unwrapping a second taco. You can ask. Why did you say yes? In the chapel. You could have redirected me. You're clearly very good at redirecting things. She didn't answer immediately. She finished unwrapping the taco. She looked at it for a moment. Then she said, because you seemed like someone who needed to be said yes to for once, and because you were laughing. And you have a very specific laugh that makes it difficult to say no to whatever caused it. I stared at her. She took a bite of her taco and looked at the parking lot and did not elaborate. I turned this over in my head the way you turn over something that is both simple and enormous. She had said yes because I was laughing. She had looked at a person she barely knew in a city built entirely on bad decisions and decided that what that person needed was someone who would say yes without calculating the cost first. That was not nothing. That was actually one of the most thoughtful things anyone had done for me in longer than I wanted to admit. I ate my taco. The afternoon sun was still warm. A pigeon was investigating a discarded napkin near the edge of the lot, with the focused ambition of someone who has identified an opportunity. Cassian bought a second taco without asking if I wanted one and handed it to me, and I took it, and we sat there in the parking lot sun like people who had been doing this for years. I thought about it through the welcome dinner that evening, sitting across the table from her, watching her talk to Della and Marcus' parents and us with the polished ease of someone who had learned early how to navigate rooms. I thought about it when our eyes met over the dinner table, and she held the eye contact for half a second longer than necessary before looking away. I thought about it when I got back to my room and checked my phone and found a text from her that said, "The tacos were better than expected." I wrote back, "Eduardo liked you." She wrote, "Eduardo liked the solution. There's a difference." I wrote, "I don't think there is. Not always." She didn't reply. But 3 minutes later, my phone showed she had read it, and somehow that felt like enough. Chapter 4. The almost answer and the interruption. The day before the wedding is always the longest day. Anyone who has been part of a wedding party knows this. The rehearsal is in the afternoon. The rehearsal dinner is in the evening. And in between, there are approximately 400 small crises that seem enormous in the moment and are forgotten by morning. A button that needs resewing, a family member who arrives 3 hours early and requires entertaining, a speech that needs one more revision, a florist who calls with a very minor follow-up question that Eduardo genuinely did not need to make a phone call about, but did anyway, because he is Eduardo and he is thorough. I woke up that morning with the specific awareness that something had shifted, and I was running out of time to figure out what to do with it. I lay in the hotel bed and stared at the ceiling and took stock. There was a woman 2 floors down who I had accidentally married, deliberately annulled, and was now, by any honest accounting, developing feelings for at a rate that was completely inconsistent with the calm, contained, low-risk person I had spent 2 years curating. There was also a wedding tomorrow, and a sister who needed me to be steady, and a return flight booked for Monday, and a life in another city that was going to resume whether or not I had sorted any of this out. I got up. I made a very deliberate effort to be practical. Cassian handled all of it. I watched her handle all of it. I started quietly handling adjacent parts of it without being asked, passing her things before she reached for them, stepping in to talk to Marcus's mother when I could see Cassian was occupied, sending Della off to rest when the afternoon was dragging her toward a quiet meltdown. Cassian noticed. She gave me a look at one point that said something like "thank you" without using any of those words. We were building something. I knew it, and I didn't say it because there was nothing to say. In 36 hours, the paperwork would be signed. In 36 hours, I would fly back to my apartment, and my third graders, and my one carefully maintained life, and Cassian would return to Houston, where she ran some kind of consulting firm that I still didn't fully understand. And whatever this was, this very specific warmth that had developed between us over tacos and florist shops and shared tasks, would fold itself up neatly and become a story. The rehearsal was held in the chapel garden, which was beautiful in the late afternoon light, all old stone and climbing roses, and the particular golden quality of a desert sun in its last hour. I stood in my spot and watched Dilla walk toward Marcus, and felt the specific combination of joy and wistfulness that always accompanies watching someone you love be loved beautifully. Cassian was standing at the edge of the garden, watching the proceedings. When the rehearsal ended and the guests began moving toward the dining room, she didn't move right away, and I walked to her without deciding to. "She's going to be very happy," I said. "Yes," Cassian said. She was still looking at the garden. She picked well. "Did you ever pick well?" It was a bold question. I wasn't sure where it came from. She turned to look at me, and for a moment the professional surface dropped entirely, and something underneath it surfaced that was older and quieter and real. "Once," she said, "a long time ago. I worked very long hours, and she decided she would rather be with someone who came home on time."
Sorry.
"Don't be." She was right. I hadn't learned yet how to be present. She looked back at the garden. "I think I'm learning." We stood there in the fading light, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her arm, and the quiet between us was the kind of quiet that has weight and texture, the kind you could lean into. I was leaning into it. I was aware that I was leaning, and I did not correct it. And then Priya appeared from the dining room doorway and called my name, because apparently there was a questions about the seating chart that only I could answer. And I went, because that is what I do. I go when I am needed. And when I glanced back from the doorway, Cassian was still standing in the garden, looking at the roses. And she did not look like someone who was functional. She looked like someone who was feeling something she hadn't scheduled. I spent the rehearsal dinner alternating between full presence for Adela, who needed it, and a kind of background awareness of Cassian's position in the room that I refused to name. She sat at the far end of the table. She gave a toast that was articulate and warm and funnier than I expected. She caught my eye once during the toast, and her voice didn't waver, but her jaw tightened slightly. And then she smiled and finished the toast, and everyone clapped. After dinner, near the courtyard, I found her standing outside with a glass of wine and her phone in her pocket untouched. She did not seem surprised to see me. "Good toast," I said. "Thank you." "I wrote it 6 times. It sounded like you meant it." "I did mean it. Every version." She looked at the sky, which in the desert is genuinely enormous, more stars than any city lets you see. 6 versions of meaning it. I was going to say something. I had something rising in me, something that had been building since the taco wall, and maybe since the note on the hotel nightstand. And I was going to say it, and she was turning toward me with an expression that suggested she might say it first. And then Marcus appeared in the courtyard doorway, looking slightly panicked, and said, Cassian, I need your help. I cannot find the rings." And it turned out the rings were in his jacket pocket in the wall, where they had been the entire time. But finding that out took 15 minutes, and by the time we returned to the courtyard, everyone had moved inside, and whatever was in the air between us had dispersed into the Nevada night. I went to bed. I lay awake for a long time. I thought about what I was going to do about this feeling that I had been trying to file under temporary circumstances, and which was increasingly refusing to be filed anywhere. I thought about the way she had looked in the garden, in the late light, looking at the roses. I thought about what she had said about presence, about learning how to be present, and about how she said it without self-pity or performance, as a simple fact of where she was in her own becoming. I thought about the way a person who is learning something looks different from a person who already knows it. There is an openness in the learning that the knowing sometimes closes. She had that openness. Underneath all the precision and the competence and the professional distance, she had it. And I was not sure I had seen it in anyone before, or at least not in anyone looking in my direction. I did not find an answer that night, but I stopped trying to not want one. Chapter 5, The Dance and the Admission. The morning of the wedding, I woke up clear-headed for the first time all week and looked at the ceiling and thought, today, after this wedding is over, I am going to say something true. I did not know exactly what. I knew the shape of it. I knew it involved Cassian and the word want and a willingness to be the person who initiates, rather than the person who waits to be approached on terms she can control. My therapist, if I had one, would have had something generous to say about that. My third graders, who operated purely on instinct, would have said, just tell her, and then gone back to drawing dinosaurs. The wedding was beautiful. It was, genuinely, the most beautiful wedding I have ever attended, and I have been to 11 weddings in the past 6 years. The chapel garden was full of the right shade of cream flowers. Eduardo had come through, and the afternoon light did everything light is supposed to do in a ceremony, falling through stone arches and turning everything gold. Della was luminous. Marcus wept openly and without embarrassment. Their vows were specific and true, the kind of vows that reference actual events and inside jokes, and the particular texture of loving someone over time, and by the end I was not the only person crying. Cassian was standing across the aisle from me. When I looked at her, she was already looking at me. She gave me a small nod, the kind that says I see you, and I gave one back. And then we both looked at the couple getting married, and the moment folded into the ceremony where it belonged. At the reception, there was dancing. I do not usually dance. I am competent at it and actively resistant to it, the combination that leads to standing near the edge of the floor, holding a glass and watching other people do it. But Della, who has always known exactly when to deploy her eyes in the specific way that means I am asking you as your sister and also as your friend, deployed those eyes at me from the middle of the dance floor. And I went. Cassian was there. Of course she was. Della had choreographed the entire evening. I was beginning to suspect even the parts that looked spontaneous. Cassian and I ended up next to each other in the way that happens when the floor is crowded and people keep moving, and the space between two people keeps closing without either of them making a decision about it. We danced near each other for one song, and then the music shifted to something slower, and the crowd thinned slightly, and Cassian looked at me and said, very quietly, "May I?" I said, "Yes." She was a careful dancer. Not stiff, careful, intentional. The way she did everything. But in the dancing, there was something that wasn't contained, something in the way she moved that was more honest than her professional posture. Her hand on my back was steady. I could feel the warmth of it through the fabric of my dress. I thought about what it meant to be held carefully. I had been held carelessly before, and held too tight before, and held with the particular conditional quality of someone who holds you in reserve. This was different. This was the way you hold something you are deciding to take seriously, and I felt it all the way through. The song was 3.5 minutes long. I know because I looked it up later, which is a thing I am not going to explain, except to say that some moments you want exact coordinates for so you can find them again. 3.5 minutes of her hand on my back and her eyes not looking away, and the noise of the receptions become something that was happening at a very comfortable distance. We didn't talk. The song was not long, but somewhere in the middle of it, I became aware that both of us had stopped pretending, that this was simply two women being functional at a wedding. When the song ended, she stepped back and looked at me, and I saw it, clear and careful and entirely unguarded, the thing she had been keeping professional distance from all week. "Ren," she said. "I know," I said. "I don't know what to do with this." "Neither do I." I looked at her, but I think I'd like to find out. She was very still for a moment. Around, the reception continued, music and champagne, and Marcus's uncle attempting the electric slide with alarming confidence, and none of it reached us. Then she said, "Come outside." The courtyard. We walked out into the courtyard, the same courtyard from the night before, stone and roses and that enormous desert sky. She turned to face me and said, "I processed the annulment paperwork this morning. I had known it was coming. It still landed somewhere specific." "Okay," I said. "I filed it. It's done." You're no longer legally anything to me. Okay, I said again. I want you to know that I did that with a completely clear head and with full intention. She paused. And I want you to know that I spent the 15 minutes after filing it thinking about how to ask if we could start something that wasn't an accident. I looked at her face in the courtyard light. This woman who wrote notes on hotel stationery and handled florists with kindness and had said yes in a Vegas chapel because she thought I needed to be said yes to for once, and I felt something open in my chest that I had been keeping carefully closed for 2 years. Ask, I said. She reached out and her thumb touched the inside of my wrist, just there, light and deliberate, and she said, "Can we start over? Not from the chapel, from right now." Properly. Yes, I said. Completely yes. She smiled, the real one, the window-opening one, and then she kissed me in the courtyard while Della danced inside, and the desert stars did their enormous, indifferent work above us, and it was nothing like an accident. It was the most on-purpose thing I had done in years. Chapter 6, The Problem with Paper, the morning after the wedding, Della found out. Not from me, not from Cassian, from a photo. Apparently there exists, in the cloud storage of a wedding photographer, who was documenting candid moments throughout the reception, a picture of me and Cassian in the courtyard. In the picture, I have my hand on her cheek, and she is looking at me like I am something she has decided to stop being careful about. The photographer had included it in the preview gallery she sent to Della as a sweet bonus, moments of joy from the wedding day. Della texted me at 7:45 in the morning with the photograph attached, and nothing else. I stared at it for a long time. We looked, in the photo, like people who had been in love for longer than they knew. I showed it to Cassian, who was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed putting on her shoes, and she looked at it and said, quietly, "That's a good photograph." "Della knows," I said. I suspected she might. She stood up. "How do you want to handle it?" "I don't know yet. I need to call her. I can come with you." "No." I looked at her. "I need to do this part first." "Let me do this part." She nodded. She picked up her blazer from the back of the chair. "I'll be in the lobby," she said. "Take as long as you need." I called Della. She picked up on the second ring, and for the first few seconds she didn't say anything, and neither did I. Then she said, "Ren, that photograph. I know. That photograph is not two people being functional at a wedding." "No," I agreed. "It isn't. There is something you are going to tell me right now." So I told her. I told her everything. The ring, the note, the annulment, the florist, the tacos, the rehearsal dinner courtyard almost moment, and then the actual moment, the real one, in the same courtyard after her first dance with Marcus. I told her in the order it happened, trying not to omit anything, because Della deserves honesty more than she deserves a clean narrative. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then Della said, "You got drunk and married my maid of honor." "Yes, and then you annulled it." "Yes, and then you fell in love with her anyway." "I don't know if it's love yet," I said. "It's something." "Something," she repeated. There was a pause during which I could hear, faintly, the ambient sound of wherever she was. A beach, maybe. The honeymoon had taken her and Marcus somewhere with a very good infinity pool. She had sent exactly one photo, and it was incandescently happy. "Ren, I need you to understand something. I have had feelings for Marcus since our third date. I told my mother 2 weeks in. I have never been a person who waits to name things. And I am sitting here, newly married, on what is technically the most romantic week of my life, and even I cannot describe what I just heard as simply something." She said the last word with gentle mockery. That was the story of a person discovering someone irreplaceable. I pressed my free hand against my chest. Something was happening behind my sternum that I had been trying not to name for 3 days. "She's your best friend," I said. "She is," Della said. "And you are my sister. Those are both facts. Neither one of them is a reason this can't be the best thing that happened to both of you." A pause. "Also, for the record, I have been watching Cassian be alone for 6 years, and it has been genuinely upsetting. She deserves this. I am choosing to take all the credit for your accidental love story by virtue of having held my bachelorette in Las Vegas. You are unbelievable, I said. I am recently married, she said. I am full of love and I intend to spread it around. Now go talk to her. Properly, not functional. Real. I went downstairs. Cassian was with me at the lobby as promised, standing near the window with her phone in her hand and her attention somewhere else when ends entirely. And when she saw me, she put the phone away and stood up straight, and there was something in her posture that was the closest thing to nervous I had ever seen from her. She knows everything, I said. How is she? Happy for us. Also furious she missed the chapel. The tension in her shoulders released slightly. I'm glad, she said. She said something, I said, and then I stopped because I was trying to decide how to say it. Cassian waited. She is very good at waiting. I think she has taught herself to wait as a form of respect, to give things the room they need to arrive. She said you let me in, I said. That you don't usually do that. That's accurate. Why? She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, because you were sitting at that rehearsal dinner table, looking at your sister's happiness with so much love and so much quiet sadness at the same time, and I thought, that is a person who gives everything to the people she loves and has talked herself into believing that's enough. And I recognized it because I used to do the same thing. She paused. And then you looked at me and you said, can you pass a bread? And you said it like you were surprised I was real. I remembered that moment. I hadn't known she'd noticed. You are extremely real, I said. She smiled. I'm working on it, she said. With some help. But I was not prepared for what was coming next, for the piece of this I had not yet seen, for the thing that would make the next few days the hardest of everything we had so far managed to navigate. Chapter 7. The distance between cities. I flew home on a Tuesday. Cassian flew home on a Monday. Houston to my city is not a short flight. It is not a drive. It is not a manageable commute that two people could negotiate with some creative scheduling and a good attitude. It is 2 hours in the air, 3 hours with the airport, time zones that are close enough to be confusing and far enough to matter. It is the kind of distance that sounds manageable in a courtyard under stars, and becomes very literal very fast when you are alone in your apartment surrounded by your actual life. My apartment is small, full of things belong to a person who has organized herself around being alone. The books are arranged by color. There is one mug that I use every morning. The kitchen is tidy, in the way that kitchens are tidy when no one else is ever in them. I walked through it on Tuesday evening and felt it as a set of choices I had made. Small daily choices to need no more space than I was already in. There is a certain kind of quiet that is restful and a certain kind that is simply the sound of too much room. I stood in my kitchen making tea I did not particularly want and became aware, for the first time in 2 years, that my apartment had the second kind of quiet. That I had been living in it so long I had stopped hearing it. The way you stop hearing a faint hum once you are used to it, and that something about the last week had turned the volume up on it in a way I could no longer manage not to notice. I thought about Cassian's kitchen, her apartment in Houston, which I had not yet seen, but which I had begun involuntarily to construct in my imagination based on available data. Precise. Well organized, books, good coffee, a view of the city that she claimed she never had time to appreciate. A desk with a lamp that she probably worked at until midnight, and then went to bed and woke up at 6 and did it again. I thought about what it would look like to be in it. To sit across from her over a meal in a place that was hers. To know the small geography of her daily life, the way you know another person's life when you have moved from visitors to something else. Cassian had texted when she landed in Houston's. It read, "Home quieter than expected." I wrote back, "Mine too. We texted every day." In the mornings, small things, the coffee shop near her office, a student who had arrived on Monday with a dinosaur drawing he had done over the weekend, specifically for the classroom dinosaur collection. In the evenings, longer, the kind of conversation that covers actual territory, opinions and observations, and the slow accumulation of knowing another person. She was funny in writing in a way that surprised me each time. dry and precise, and occasionally, without warning, genuinely tender. But 2 weeks in, the distance began to do what distance does. It wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was small and accumulative, a response that came at midnight instead of in the evening because she was working late. A call we had planned that had to be rescheduled because her client meeting ran long. A day that passed with only 2 texts, both brief, both fine, and the particular silence of a fine that might be drifting. I sat with it for 3 days before I said anything, which is 2.5 days longer than I should have, because sitting with things quietly is my primary relationship skill and also my primary relationship flaw. On Thursday evening, I called her. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice sounded tired. Not cold tired, and there is a difference, but I had to remind myself of it. Hey, she said. Hey, I pulled my knees up on the couch. You sound tired. I am tired. Big week. Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, and then I stopped and made a decision. Actually, I'm not entirely fine. I think we're drifting, and I don't like it, and I wanted to say that instead of waiting to see if it corrected itself. There was a pause on the line. You're right, she said. We are drifting. Is that just the distance, or is there something else? Another pause. Longer. I had the familiar impulse to fill it with reassurance, to smooth it over, to make it easier. I didn't. I got scared, she said, 2 weeks in, which is embarrassing to admit. Scared of what? Scared that I'm going to work too much again. Scared that you're going to feel like I'm keeping you in a box and I will not have meant to. And by the time I realize, it will already be done. The thing she had been afraid of was the thing I had told her I was afraid of. On the first night, in the karaoke bar, I hadn't known she had been carrying that. Cassian, I said, yes. I am not going to let either of us do that. That is not a one-person job. You don't get to take all the responsibility for something that belongs to both of us. The sigh on the line was different this time. Fuller, like something settling. Okay, she said quietly. Okay meaning you believe me, or okay meaning you'll consider it. Okay meaning both. A pause. I miss you. I know, I said. I miss you too. That's why I called. We talked for 2 more hours. We talked about what we wanted and what we were afraid of and what we were willing to try. We talked about visiting. We talked about what the geography of this was going to require. We talked about the things that had made each of us stop trying in the past and about why we were both, apparently, willing to try again. When I hung up, it was past midnight. The apartment was dark and quiet, and I sat in it feeling different than I had felt in it before. Not like someone who had organized herself around being alone. Like someone who was starting to leave space. I texted her. Still scared? She wrote back, terrified. You? I wrote, yes. But I think that means it matters. 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice. Then, I think so too. Good night, Ren. Good night, I wrote, and meant it completely. Chapter 8. The visit and the conversation. She came to me first. That was her idea. She texted me the night before she flew in and said, I land at 2:15. Yeah, I don't have to pick me up. And I wrote back, I'm picking you up. She didn't argue. I think she was glad. She flew in on a Friday afternoon in the second month. And I picked her up from the airport in my slightly unreliable car with the cracked dashboard that I kept meaning to get fixed. And when she walked through the arrival's door with her carry-on and her blazer over her arm and found me standing there, she stopped for a moment, like she was confirming something she had been trying to hold in memory. And then she smiled, the window opening one, and walked toward me. She said, your car has a crack in the dashboard. I said, I know. She said, I know someone who knows someone. I said, don't you dare fix my car, she said, noted. And we drove out of the airport into the afternoon. And it was, immediately and without effort, the most comfortable I had felt in the presence of another person in longer than I wanted to calculate. I drove her through my city. I showed her things the way you show a place to someone you want to understand you. The coffee shop on the corner where I grade papers on Saturday mornings. The park where I run, badly, 3 times a week with more intention than skill. The school, passed slowly from the outside, the small brick building where I spend my days with 9-year-olds who are teaching me, constantly, what it looks like to be undefended. She sat in my passenger seat and looked at all of it with her careful, genuine attention. At the apartment, she stood in the kitchen while I made dinner, which is not something I usually let people do, because my kitchen feels very small with another person in it. And it turns out that Cassian in a kitchen is something I want very much. She leaned against the counter with her arms crossed and asked questions about the meal I was making and offered exactly one helpful suggestion that I implemented immediately. She washed the dishes while I dried them, and the domesticity of it, the ordinary rightness of it, was so specific and so sweet that I had to look away twice. After dinner, we sat on the couch with wine and talked for 4 hours. I want to say something about what it feels like to be talked to by Cassians when she is not performing competence for anyone. In professional settings, she has a particular quality of attention that is focused and efficient and slightly intimidating in the way that very capable people can be inadvertently intimidating. But on my couch, with the lamp making the room warm and the wine doing its small gentle work, she was different. She was slower. She looked at me when I spoke the way you look at something you are genuinely trying to understand rather than simply process. She asked questions that suggested she had been listening not just to the words but to what was underneath them. She said what she actually thought, and when she was uncertain, she said that too. And there was something in the combination of her precision and her honesty that made the whole evening feel like being somewhere I had been looking for without knowing I was looking. We talked about her firm, really talked, in a way that let me understand for the first time what it meant to her, not just professionally, but personally, the thing she had built from almost nothing, the thing that had cost her a relationship and several years of sleep, and that she was now, for the first time, learning how to hold without letting it hold her instead. She talked about her family, a father who had expected precision from everyone, and a mother who had modeled warmth so genuinely that Cassian had grown up believing she had to earn what her mother gave freely. She talked about the woman who had left because she worked too much, and said without bitterness that she thought they had both known it was coming before either of them admitted it. I told her about the relationship I had described in the karaoke bar, the 2 years of careful partial presence. The way it had ended not in a fight, but in a conversation so measured that I had walked away from it not sure whether to grieve or simply file it. I told her how I decided afterward that needing things was a form of risk I was no longer qualified to take, and how I had managed that decision pretty successfully until a drunk night in Vegas had dismantled it in front of someone I barely knew. I'm glad, she said, that it was dismantled. I'm glad it was you, I said. She set down her wine glass and reached for my hand and held it in both of hers, looking at it the way she looked at things she was reading carefully, making sure she was understanding correctly. I want to do this properly, she said, not fast, but properly. I want to visit. I want you to visit. I want to figure out over time what properly looks like for two specific people who are not anyone else. That's very you, I said. The precision. Is that okay? It is extremely okay. I turned my hand over and held hers back. I was afraid of too much, too fast, too, because it's easier to protect yourself from something small than from something real. Yes, I said. Exactly that. She leaned in and kissed me in a way that was patient and certain, the way she did everything that mattered to her, and I let myself want it completely. All of it. This woman and this beginning and this willingness to start something real with both eyes open. She stayed for the weekend. On Saturday, I took her to the park, and she ran alongside me at my bad pace without comment or correction. On Sunday, she sat at the back of a coffee shop and worked while I graded papers, and we shared a table for 3 hours in comfortable silence that was the opposite of distance. When her car came to take her to the airport, she stood in my doorway for a moment and looked at the apartment with the expression of someone taking a measurement. I like it here, she said. You can come back, I said. I know. She kissed me once, quick and warm. I'm counting on it. She walked down the hall toward the elevator, and I stood in my doorway watching her go and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the space in my life was not organized around an absence, but around a possibility. I texted her before her plane landed. I wrote, "Next time I come to you." She wrote back, "Already cleared my calendar." I closed my phone and went inside and organized exactly nothing because the apartment felt exactly right the way it was. Chapter 9: The Choice and the Commitment. 3 months after Vegas, Della called me from her honeymoon follow-up vacation, which is apparently a thing that people do, a second smaller trip to process the first trip. And she said, "Tell me everything." So I did. I told her about the airport pickup and the kitchen and the 4-hour couch conversation. I told her about my visit to Houston, where Cassian had shown me her city with the same particular intentionality with which I had shown her mine, the coffee shop near her office, the building where she worked on a high floor with too many windows and a spectacular view of the skyline that she claimed she never had time to look at, and clearly did. I told her about the dinner where I met two of Cassian's friends, both of whom had looked at me with the particular expression of people who are assessing someone for a position that matters, and who had, by the end of the evening, treated me like I had already got the job. I told her about the Sunday morning when I woke up in Cassian's guest room, which had been made up with the precision you use for a person's you are sping will stay, and smelled coffee, and went to the kitchen, and found Cassian making breakfast with her hair down for the first time, and how the sight of it had been so quietly startling, such an ordinary, extraordinary thing, that I had stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking. I told her about the afternoon we spent in a bookshop in Houston's museum district, 2 hours of quiet wandering and occasional encouragements handed wordlessly between us, and how Cassian had bought a novel she thought I would like without asking if I wanted it, and had handed it to me in the car with no ceremony whatsoever. The way you do things for people you have decided to do things for. I told her about the video call 3 weeks after that, when Cassian was clearly exhausted after a long client week, but had called anyway because it was our usual time and she did not seem to consider changing it. I told her about the text thread that had developed its own language, references, and shorthand that only meant something between the two of us, the private vocabulary of people who have been paying enough attention to build one. Della listened to all of it without interrupting, which is a thing she almost never manages to do. When I finished, she said, "You're in love with her." I was quiet for a moment. "Yes," I said. "I think I have been for a while." "Have you told her?" "Not yet." "Ren, I know, I'm going to." When it feels like the right time. You know what the right time is now." The right time is always now. I learned that from my own wedding, which I have now experienced firsthand, so I am an expert. I laughed. I could not help it. "Your wedding is how I got into this situation." "You are welcome," she said serenely. "Now go tell the woman." I called Cassian that evening. Not texted. Called. She picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the city behind her, Houston traffic, and the particular ambient quality of a high floor with windows. And she said, "Hey," in the way that she says hey when she was hoping I would call. "I need to tell you something," I said. "Okay," she said, not alarmed, ready. "I love you." I said it clearly because it was true, and because I had learned from 2 years of partial presence that truth delivered clearly is better than truth wrapped in careful distance. I know it's 3 months from a Vegas chapel, and I know we're still figuring out the geography, and I know you said you wanted to do this properly and not fast, and I think I love you at whatever pace is available. I think I have for a while. There was a silence. Then Cassian said, "Ren, yes. I have been trying to figure out the right time to say that to you for 6 weeks." I exhaled. I hadn't known I was holding it. 6 weeks. I kept thinking it was too fast, that I would scare you, that it would feel like pressure. A pause. I wrote it in a note once and then deleted the message because I thought it was too much. "Hotel stationery?" A smile came through in her voice. "Different kind of note. I want all the notes," I said. "Every version. I want all of them." She laughed, the real laugh, and I sat on a couch at my small apartment that no longer felt organized around absence, and felt the specific joy of being wanted on purpose by someone who chose it clearly. I love you, she said. That was always going to be true from the moment you sat down across from me at that breakfast table without being invited and asked what happened. You answered, I said. You sat down, she said. We stayed on the phone for another 2 hours. We talked about what next looked like in the practical, logistical, two people in different cities sense of the word next. She had been thinking about expanding her firm. There was a possible office. It was a conversation for later, but she had been having it, which meant she had been thinking about later in a way that included me. I had been thinking about whether a third-grade teacher could transfer across a state line. We were both separately in the same direction. That felt, to me, like enough for a Tuesday night. That felt to me like the beginning of something that didn't need to be rushed because it was already happening. We had both, without coordinating it, started organizing ourselves around a future that included the other person. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing, the whole quiet secret of choosing someone, that you start thinking in the plural before you've agreed to. I did not say any of that out loud yet. We were 3 months from a Vegas chapel. We had time. We had the particular luxury of something real that is also patient, that does not need to sprint because it is already certain of where it is going. I went to sleep that night feeling different in my body. Not lighter exactly, clearer, like a room where someone has opened a window. Chapter 10, The Life We Chose on Purpose. 6 months after I woke up with a ring on my finger in a Las Vegas hotel room, Cassian Voss moved to my city. It was not a fast decision. It was a very Cassian decision, researched and considered and discussed from multiple angles over several weeks, and then made completely and without second guessing once she had made it. The firm had been expanding anyway. My city had a market she had been looking at. And she had over 3 months of visiting and being visited, and 4-hour couch conversations and Sunday morning kitchens, and a shared running pace that was never going to win any awards, decided that the view from her window was less important than the view of a life she actually wanted. I helped her move. She had fewer boxes than I expected and more books, which felt correct. We spent a Saturday arranging furniture in the new apartment, which was 3 blocks from mine, which was the arrangement we had agreed on, because we are both people who need their own space, and because arriving at each other's doors willingly, every time, is something we both wanted more than the automatic proximity of sharing one. We had talked about it seriously before she made the decision, sitting at my kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, with coffee, and the specific quality of attention you bring to conversations that are going to matter. She had laid out the options with characteristic thoroughness, the ways it could work, the ways it could be difficult, the things each of us would need to be careful about. I had listened and added things, and disagreed on 2 points, and she had revised her thinking on one of them. It had been one of the best conversations I had ever had about a relationship. Not because it was romantic, though there was something romantic in its seriousness, in the way she treated the logistics of loving me as something worth thinking about carefully. But because it was honest and in a way that felt like the foundation of something built to last. She chose 3 blocks away, not next door, not across town. 3 blocks, which takes 4 minutes to walk and less than 1 minute to drive, and exactly the right amount of time to want someone before you arrive. On Sunday, after the move, she came to my apartment for coffee and sat in my kitchen and read the newspaper on her phone while I made eggs, and my kitchen did not feel small at all. It felt exactly like the room I had been living in without quite inhabiting. She said the eggs were good. I said she was contractually obligated to say that. She said she was only contractually obligated to be honest, and the eggs were genuinely good. I put more coffee on. We stayed like that for 2 hours, doing nothing in particular, being present in the way that is the actual work of loving someone, the daily choosing of it, the ordinary practice of it. My students, when I told them I had a person I was very glad about, immediately demanded to know everything, and then lost interest when I declined to provide details and went back to their worksheets. The dinosaur kid made her a drawing, unprompted, because I had mentioned her once in passing, and apparently that was enough. When I told Cassian about the drawing, she looked at me with an expression that I now recognized as the one she uses when something has landed somewhere she didn't expect to have anything land. She framed it. It's in her office now. It hangs next to her degrees, between a certificate from a business fellowship she completed at 32, and a photo of the view from her old Houston office on a clear day. The dinosaur drawing is not, by any conventional measure, the most impressive thing on that wall, but it is the one that visitors always ask about. It is the one she looks at first when she comes in the morning. She told me that once, casually, and then changed the subject, which is the thing she does when something has gotten past her defenses before she could organize a response to it. Delos visited in the fall, and the four of us had dinner, her and Marcus and Cassian and me. And at one point across the table, Della looked at me with an expression that was entirely made of the kind of love that comes from knowing someone their whole life and watching them finally arrive somewhere good. I looked back at her, and the thing that passed between us was silent and complete and needed nothing added. On the walk home that night, Cassian and I went the long way through the park because the evening was good. One of those October evenings where the air is exactly right, and the light on the trees is the kind that makes everything look like a painting you would want to keep. We walked without talking for a while, comfortable in the way that you can only be comfortable with someone when you have learned the specific shape of their silences. She reached for my hand. I took it. "I've been thinking," she said. "About what?" "About a trip." She was quiet for a moment. "I think we should go back to Las Vegas." I looked at her. "Why?" "Because the first time we were there, we made something accidental. And I would like to go back and make something on purpose." She glanced at me sideways. She was doing the thing where she waits to see if a thing lands before she continues. Not the same thing. Something new. Something we actually choose clearly without champagne as a factor. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves Eduardo's flowers," she said. "If you want." I stopped walking. She stopped beside me. The park was quiet around us, and the October light was doing its work on the trees. And I looked at this woman who had left a note on hotel stationery and filed annulment paperwork at 6:15 in the morning, and smiled in a karaoke bar at something I said, and said yes in a Vegas chapel because she thought I deserved to be said yes to, and who had been, every day since, practicing the art of being present. "I want," I said. She smiled. "The real one. The one that opens everything." "I'll call Eduardo," she said. We walked home through the good October light, hand in hand, not rushing, choosing every step. At my building, she stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked at me in the particular way she has, the full way, the way that says she is not somewhere else. She said, "I want you to know that I am very glad I went to Las Vegas." "You say that every 6 months," she said, "and every 6 months it keeps being true, so I keep saying it." I said, "I'm very glad you said yes." She said you had a very specific laugh. I said, "So you keep mentioning." She said, "I'll keep mentioning it for a very long time." And then she kissed me on the bottom step of my building in the good October light. And this time, every single one of them was on purpose. Every single one of us was on purpose. And that, in the end, is the whole story. Two people who learned, a little late and a little accidentally, and then finally, completely on purpose, how to want something and say so, how to stay, how to choose each other not once, in a Vegas chapel with fake flowers and an Elvis officiant, but every day in the ordinary ways, in the real ones. The coffee, the eggs. The 3 blocks between two apartments that are both home, because the person you love is in them. I didn't know any of that was possible, once. I had organized my entire life around not needing it. And then I sat down across from someone in a hotel breakfast room without being invited and asked what happened. And she answered, and I was never the same after that. I am profoundly, completely glad.